Welcome to Crime Stories for Sleep in every school building across the country. When the final bell rings and the last student leaves, when teachers pack up their classrooms and administrators lock their offices, there's always one person left behind. The janitor, the custodian, the night maintenance worker whose job it is to walk these empty halls, clean these silent classrooms, and maintain these buildings that hold decades of memories, secrets, and sometimes worse things. Tonight, we're sharing 5 true stories from school janitors who discovered that some buildings never truly empty, and some night shifts reveal horrors that were better left hidden in the darkness. These are their stories. Story 1, the after-hours cleaner. My name is Carl, and for 15 years, I worked as the night custodian at Roosevelt Elementary School in rural Pennsylvania. I took pride in my work, showing up every evening at 6 o'clock sharp to clean and maintain a building that served over 400 students and 30 staff members. It was honest work, quiet work, and I preferred the solitude of empty hallways to the chaos of a building full of children during regular school hours. The basement storage room was part of my weekly routine. Every Friday night, I'd descend the concrete steps with my cart full of cleaning supplies and spend an hour organizing the stored furniture, checking for pest damage, and mopping the floors that collected dust and debris throughout the week. The basement ran the full length of the building, divided into several rooms that held everything from outdated textbooks to broken desks to old gymnasium equipment that hadn't been used in decades. It was during my 3rd year at Roosevelt that I first heard the sounds coming from the pipes. Not the normal settling and expansion noises that any old building makes, but distinct tapping patterns that seemed almost deliberate. 3 short taps, followed by 2 long ones, then silence. The pattern would repeat every few minutes, always from somewhere deep within the walls where the old steam heating system ran its maze of metal arteries throughout the building. Mentioned it to the day maintenance supervisor, Mike Henderson, but he brushed off my concerns with the standard explanation about thermal expansion and water hammer effects. Old buildings make noise, he said. Nothing unusual about it. But the tapping only happened on Friday nights, and only when I was alone in the basement storage area. Never during the day, never when other staff members were present, and never when I was working in other parts of the building. The pattern became so familiar that I found myself anticipating it, checking my watch around the time it usually started. 9:30 p.m., like clockwork. 3 short, 2 long, silence. 3 short, 2 long, silence. It continued for exactly 17 minutes, then stopped until the following Friday. I began timing it out of curiosity, keeping notes in a small notebook I carried with my supplies. The timing never varied by more than a minute or 2. After several months of this routine, I decided to investigate the source more systematically. The basement storage room sat directly below the school's main office, and the tapping seemed to come from the section of wall that housed the vertical pipes, running up to the administrative offices above. I traced the pipe layout using the building's original blueprints, which were kept in a filing cabinet in the storage room itself. Yellowed documents from the school's construction in 1954. The blueprints showed something interesting that I hadn't noticed before. The main steam line running through that section of wall had been modified sometime in the late 1960s, with additional pipes added to serve a room that no longer appeared on current floor plans. According to the original documentation, there had been a small office space directly above the basement storage room, positioned between what was now the principal's office and the secretary's workspace. But when I checked the current layout of the administrative area, no such room existed. The space had been incorporated into the main office, with no evidence that a separate room had ever been there. This discovery led me to examine the basement ceiling more carefully. Using a flashlight, I could see where the ceiling tiles had been modified to accommodate the additional pipework. Some tiles were newer than others, suggesting renovations had taken place over the years. But more importantly, I noticed water stains on several tiles directly below where the mysterious room had been located. Not recent stains from active leaks, but old discoloration that suggested historical water damage that had never been properly addressed. The tapping pattern took on new significance when I realized it might be related to this hidden history. I began researching the school's records, spending my dinner breaks in the administrative office during evening hours when the staff had gone home. Personnel files from the 1960s revealed that the school had employed a guidance counselor named Margaret Foster who had maintained an office in that exact location. Her employment had ended abruptly in October 1968, with no forwarding address in her file and no explanation for her departure. Further investigation revealed a newspaper archive in the town library that contained a brief mention of Margaret Foster in connection with a local missing person case from that same time period. According to the article, she had failed to return home from work on a Friday evening in October 1968, and her car had been found in the school parking lot the following Monday morning. The case had been investigated by local police, but no evidence of foul play was discovered. Margaret Foster had simply vanished, leaving behind her personal belongings in her office, and no indication of where she might have gone or why that the Friday evening timeline was particularly disturbing. If Margaret Foster had disappeared on a Friday night, she would have been in the building during the same hours I worked my weekly basement shift. The thought that her disappearance might somehow be connected to the strange tapping sounds made my skin crawl. But I couldn't ignore the coincidence of timing and location. Decided to conduct a more thorough investigation of the basement storage area itself, focusing on the section directly below Margaret Foster's former office. The floor in that area was the original concrete slab from 1954, but I noticed several patches where repairs had been made over the years. Most were clearly related to plumbing work or electrical upgrades, but one patch stood out as different. It was located precisely below where Margaret Foster's office had been. And unlike the other repairs, this concrete work appeared to have been done hastily, without proper finishing or matching of the surrounding surface texture. Asterisk, asterisk. The tapping sounds began taking on a different character once I knew their possible connection to Margaret Foster's disappearance. Instead of random noise from thermal expansion, they seemed more like a deliberate attempt at communication. 3 short, 2 long. I realized it might be Morse code, though I wasn't familiar enough with the pattern to decode it immediately. I spent several Friday nights transcribing the complete sequence, noting exactly how long each tap lasted and how much silence fell between them. When I finally looked up the Morse code translation, the message was chilling in its simplicity. SOS. Help me. SOS. Help me. The pattern repeated for exactly 17 minutes every Friday night, broadcast from somewhere within the walls where Margaret Foster's office had once existed, possibly from someone who had been calling for help for over 30 years. The discovery forced me to make a decision about what to do with this information. I could report it to the police, but they would likely dismiss it as the imagination of a lonely night worker influenced by old building noises. I could share it with the school administration, but that would probably result in my job being terminated for wasting time on ghost stories instead of focusing on my custodial duties. Or I could try to respond to the message myself, to see if whatever was causing the sounds would react to acknowledgement. The following Friday night, I positioned myself in the basement storage room at 9:25 p.m. and waited for the tapping to begin. When it started right on schedule, I used my keyring to tap out a response against the metal pipes. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS received. I'm here. The tapping stopped immediately, leaving the basement in absolute silence for the first time in months. Then, after about 30 seconds, new sounds began emerging from the walls. Not tapping this time, but what sounded like muffled voices coming from somewhere deep within the building's infrastructure. I pressed my ear against the wall where the sound seemed strongest and heard what I can only describe as a conversation taking place in the space between the walls. Though I couldn't make out specific words, the voices continued for several minutes, sometimes rising in volume as though the speakers were becoming agitated or urgent, sometimes fading to barely audible whispers. There were definitely two distinct voices, one that sounded like a woman and another that was harder to identify. The woman's voice had a pleading quality, while the other seemed more aggressive, more demanding. As I listened, I became convinced that I was somehow eavesdropping on events from 1968, hearing Margaret Foster's final conversation replayed endlessly within the building's walls. The aggressive voice might belong to whoever had caused her disappearance, and the storage room where I stood might be directly above where she had been buried all those years ago. Asterisk, asterisk. The conversation ended abruptly, followed by sounds that made my blood run cold. Dragging noises, the sound of concrete being broken and reformed, and finally silence that lasted until I left the building several hours later. I never heard the traditional tapping pattern again, but every Friday night thereafter, the basement was filled with those terrible replayed conversations, growing louder and more distinct as the weeks passed. Asterisk, asterisk. Eventually, I could make out specific phrases. Please don't do this. Nobody will look for you here. The basement storage room. Under the new concrete, the voices became so clear that I began to understand exactly what had happened to Margaret Foster and why her disappearance had never been solved. I worked at Roosevelt Elementary for 2 more years after that discovery, but I never again cleaned the basement storage room on Friday nights. I rearranged my schedule to handle that area during the week, leaving Friday evenings for other parts of the building. The sounds continued, though I only heard them when I accidentally passed by the basement entrance during the critical time period. When I finally left that job to work at a newer school across town, I considered reporting what I had learned to the police. But 37 years had passed since Margaret Foster's disappearance, and I had no physical evidence beyond my own testimony about voices in the walls. Instead, I left an anonymous note in the current principal's mailbox, suggesting that the basement storage room be excavated as part of future renovation work. I heard through former colleagues that the school eventually did conduct foundation repairs in that area, though I never learned whether they discovered anything that might have been related to Margaret Foster's fate. But I do know that the Friday night custodian who replaced me reported no unusual sounds from the basement, which suggests that whatever had been trapped down there finally found the peace that had eluded it for nearly 4 decades. Story 2, The Night Custodian, asterisk. I'm James Patterson, and I spent 8 years as the night custodian at Madison High School in suburban Ohio. The position required me to maintain the entire facility after hours, but the gymnasium was always my favorite part of the job. There's something peaceful about a basketball court at night. All that polished hardwood reflecting the security lights, the perfect symmetry of the hoops and court markings, creating order in the darkness. Madison High had a proud basketball tradition going back to the 1940s, with championship banners hanging from the rafters and display cases full of trophies near the main entrance. The gym itself was classic 1960s construction, with wooden bleachers that could seat about 800 people and a court that was maintained to near professional standards. During the day, it buzzed with activity from physical education classes, team practices, and occasional assemblies, but at night it became my domain. My routine was always the same. I'd start by sweeping the court from center court outward in expanding circles, collecting dust and debris that had accumulated during the day. Then I'd mop in the same pattern, using a specialized cleaner that preserved the wood's finish while removing scuff marks and maintaining the shine that made Madison's court one of the best in the district. The whole process took about 90 minutes, and I usually finished around 11 p.m. It was during my second year at Madison that I first noticed the sounds coming from the bleachers. Subtle at first, like the creaking you'd expect from old wooden structures settling after a day of use. But as the months passed, the sounds became more distinct and harder to explain. Footsteps moving across the bleacher platforms, the squeak of hinges as bench seats were lowered, the rustle of clothing, and occasional whispers that seemed to come from multiple locations simultaneously. The sounds only occurred during my Friday night shifts, and only when I was alone in the gymnasium. I'd stop my cleaning routine and listen carefully, trying to locate the source. But the acoustics of the gym made it impossible to pinpoint where the noises originated. They seemed to move around the bleacher area, sometimes concentrated in the student section behind the home team bench, sometimes scattered throughout the visitor seating across the court. I mentioned the phenomena to the day maintenance supervisor, but he dismissed it as typical old building behavior. Wooden bleachers expand and contract with temperature changes, he explained, and the gymnasium's heating system created air currents that could cause various sounds. His explanation made sense during our daytime conversation, but it didn't account for the specific timing or the increasingly human character of the noises I was hearing. After several months of these Friday night disturbances, I decided to investigate more systematically. I began timing the sounds, noting when they started and stopped, and documenting any patterns in their location or intensity. What I discovered was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The sounds began at exactly 10:15 p.m. every Friday and continued until I finished cleaning the court and left the gymnasium. They never occurred before I arrived or after I departed, suggesting they were somehow connected to my presence in the building. More disturbing was the realization that the sounds weren't random. They followed patterns that suggested coordinated activity, as though multiple people were moving through the bleachers in organized fashion. I could hear what sounded like groups gathering in specific sections. Conversations too quiet to understand, but clearly involving multiple voices, and occasional bursts of activity that resembled crowd reactions to sporting events. The breakthrough came during my fourth year at Madison, when I decided to position myself in different areas of the gymnasium to better understand what I was hearing. Instead of continuing my normal cleaning routine when the sounds began, I climbed up into the bleachers themselves and sat quietly in the student section, waiting to see what would happen. What I experienced that night changed my understanding of the situation completely. Sitting in the bleachers in darkness, with only the court lights providing illumination below, I began to see movement in my peripheral vision. Faint shapes moving through the seating areas, translucent figures that became more visible when I wasn't looking directly at them. They appeared to be students, teenagers dressed in clothing styles from different eras, all gathering in the gymnasium for some kind of event. As I watched, more figures appeared on the court itself. Players in basketball uniforms from various decades, some wearing the modern Madison Hawks jerseys I recognized, others in older styles that suggested teams from the school's earlier history. They were going through what appeared to be warm-up drills, dribbling balls that made no sound when they hit the hardwood, shooting at baskets that registered no impact when the balls passed through the hoops. The phantom game that followed was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Two full teams played a complete basketball game, with spectators in the bleachers cheering and reacting to the action on the court. I could see players making shots, committing fouls, and celebrating scoring plays, while the crowd responded with appropriate enthusiasm. But everything occurred in absolute silence, as though I was watching a movie with the sound turned off. The game followed normal basketball rules and timing, lasting approximately 45 minutes from opening tip-off to final buzzer. During timeouts, I could see coaches drawing plays on clipboards and players gathering in huddles around the benches. The crowd stood for exciting plays, booed questionable referee calls that I couldn't see but apparently were happening in their version of reality, and celebrated when their team scored. when the final buzzer sounded. The Phantom teams shook hands at center court, while the spectators filed out of the bleachers in orderly fashion. Within minutes, the gymnasium was empty again, leaving me alone with the normal security lighting and the polished court that showed no evidence of the game that had just taken place. I continued to witness these Friday night games throughout the remainder of my time at Madison High. Each week brought different teams from different eras of the school's basketball history, sometimes featuring players whose names I recognized from the trophy cases and championship banners. The games were always played with full intensity and complete crowd participation, despite occurring in a dimension that existed parallel to, but separate from normal reality. Research into the school's basketball history revealed several tragic incidents that might explain the phenomenon. In 1963, 3 members of the varsity team had died in a car accident following a Friday night home game. In 1978, a student had suffered a fatal heart attack during a playoff game in the Gymnasium. In 1985, a former star player had died of cancer just weeks before the team retired his jersey in a special ceremony. Each of these individuals appeared regularly in the Phantom games I witnessed, playing alongside teammates from their respective eras and competing against opponents from other time periods in matches that transcended normal chronology. It was as though the Gymnasium had somehow captured the essence of every important basketball moment in the school's history and was replaying them endlessly for an audience of other departed spirits who had shared the same passion for the game. The most moving game one witnessed occurred during my final year at Madison, when the Phantom teams included players from across 8 decades of school basketball history. Former rivals played as teammates, coaches from different generations collaborated on strategy, and spectators who had never met in life cheered together for a team that represented the collective spirit of Madison High School basketball. That game ended differently from all the others. Instead of the usual silent celebration and orderly departure, the players and spectators turned toward where I sat in the bleachers and acknowledged my presence with waves and nods that suggested they had been aware of me all along. It was their way of saying goodbye, thanking me for serving as witness to their ongoing dedication to the game they had loved in life and continued to honor in whatever form of existence they now shared. ***, I left Madison High School the following month to take a position at a newly constructed facility across town. The gymnasium at my new school was modern and efficient, with state-of-the-art equipment and synthetic flooring that required less maintenance than the old wooden court at Madison. But it lacked the history and character that had made those Friday night experiences so memorable. My replacement at Madison High reported no unusual activity in the gymnasium, which suggested that the Phantom games had been specifically meant for me to witness. Perhaps my 8 years of dedicated service to the facility had earned me the privilege of observing this spiritual continuation of the school's basketball tradition. Or perhaps the spirits simply needed someone to acknowledge their ongoing presence in the place that had meant so much to them during their mortal lives. Either way, I consider myself fortunate to have been part of something larger than routine custodial work. Those Friday night games reminded me that buildings like Madison High School aren't just structures made of concrete and steel, but repositories of human experiences that continue to resonate long after the original participants have moved on to whatever comes next. The gymnasium may appear empty when the regular users go home, but for those who know how to look, it remains forever filled with the eternal game that connects past, present, and future in the timeless pursuit of excellence and teamwork that defines the best of high school athletics. Story 3. The Third Shift Keeper. My name is Patricia Williams, and for 12 years I worked the third shift as custodial supervisor at Riverside High School in Northern California. The position required me to oversee maintenance activities from midnight until 8 a.m., ensuring that the entire facility was clean and ready for the next school day. It was demanding work, but I appreciated the autonomy and the quiet environment that allowed me to be thorough and methodical in my approach. The school library was always the most challenging part of my nightly routine. Unlike classrooms or administrative offices that could be cleaned efficiently with standard procedures, the library required careful attention to thousands of books, dozens of reading tables, and computer workstations that needed individual care. The head librarian, Mrs. Blackwood, was particularly strict about maintaining order and cleanliness, leaving detailed instructions about proper procedures for handling books and preserving the research materials that students and faculty depended upon. Riverside High's library was a beautiful space, built in the classical style with high ceilings, tall windows, and wooden shelves that reached almost to the crown molding. The collection included over 15,000 books, ranging from current textbooks to historical volumes that dated back to the school's founding in 1923. The reading area featured heavy oak tables with brass reading lamps, and the whole atmosphere suggested serious academic work rather than casual browsing. During my second year at Riverside, I began noticing irregularities in the library that couldn't be explained by normal student or faculty use. Books would be found on reading tables each morning, open to specific pages with careful annotations in the margins, despite the fact that I had personally secured the library the previous evening with all materials properly shelved. The annotations were always in the same handwriting, written with fountain pen ink in a style that suggested someone with formal training in penmanship. The annotated books covered a wide range of subjects, but they shared common themes related to historical research methods, archival preservation techniques, and documentation of local events from the early 20th century. Someone was conducting systematic research using the library's resources, but they were doing so after hours when the building was supposed to be completely secured. The quality and sophistication of the research notes suggested graduate-level academic work, far beyond what would be expected from high school students. I reported these incidents to the day administration, but they found no evidence of unauthorized building access. All doors and windows were properly secured each morning. The alarm system showed no breaches, and none of the staff members had been using the library for after-hours research. The mystery deepened when I began staying later in the library to observe what was happening during the night hours. The breakthrough came during my 4th year at Riverside, when I decided to position myself quietly in the library during my normal cleaning time to see if I could detect the source of the mysterious research activity. I dimmed the lights and sat at one of the reading tables, pretending to review my custodial schedules, while actually watching for any unusual activity among the book stacks. Around 2:30 a.m., I began to notice movement in the historical section at the far end of the library. Someone was moving between the shelves, selecting books with obvious familiarity with the collection and carrying them to a reading table near the windows. The figure was indistinct in the low light, but appeared to be a middle-aged man wearing clothing that seemed oddly formal for modern times, more like what a librarian or professor might have worn in the 1940s or 1950s. The man worked with intense concentration, consulting multiple books simultaneously and making detailed notes in a leather-bound journal. His research process was methodical and professional, suggesting extensive experience with academic investigation. He seemed particularly interested in materials related to local history, especially documents concerning Riverside High, school's early years, and prominent families who had lived in the area during the first half of the century. As I watched, more details became clear. The man was translucent, visible, but obviously not solid in the way living people appeared. His movements had a quality that suggested he existed in a slightly different dimension from the physical world, interacting with the books and furniture, but not quite inhabiting the same space as normal reality. He was conducting research that had begun during his lifetime and continued. Now, despite his changed state of existence, the phantom researcher worked until approximately 4 a.m., then carefully returned all books to their proper locations on the shelves and departed through the main library entrance without opening the door. His research table was left clean and organized, with no physical evidence of the hours of work that had just taken place. But the following morning, Mrs. Blackwood would find books on that same table, annotated with notes that advanced whatever investigation the spirit was pursuing. My observations over the following months revealed that the phantom researcher followed a consistent schedule, appearing in the library 3 nights per week to continue his work. His research focused on documenting the complete history of Riverside High School, particularly the contributions of faculty members and students who had made significant achievements during the school's early decades. The quality of his work was extraordinary, uncovering connections and details that had been forgotten or overlooked by conventional historians. Through careful examination of his research notes, I learned that the phantom was likely Dr. Howard Blackwood, the school's first head librarian, who had served from 1925 until his death in 1954. Dr. Blackwood had been a respected scholar who had begun writing a comprehensive history of Riverside High School, but had died before completing the project. His research notes from life matched the handwriting I observed on the annotated books, and his areas of expertise aligned perfectly with the subjects he continued to investigate after death. Dr. Blackwood's phantom research was extraordinarily thorough and valuable. He had access to historical documents that were no longer available to living researchers, could cross-reference sources that had been lost or destroyed, and possessed personal knowledge of events and people from the school's founding era. His work was advancing historical understanding in ways that would have been impossible for conventional scholars. But the results existed in a form that couldn't be easily shared with the living academic community. The situation became more complex when I realized that Dr. Blackwood was aware of my presence and observations. During my 5th year at Riverside, he began leaving notes specifically for me, written on library cards and placed where I would find them during my cleaning routine. The notes explained his research project, thanked me for allowing him to continue his work undisturbed, and requested assistance with specific aspects of his investigation that required interaction with the physical world. Dr. Blackwood's requests were modest and reasonable. He asked me to retrieve certain books from storage areas he couldn't access, to verify publication dates on materials that appeared different to him than they did to living observers, and occasionally to transcribe his research notes into forms that could survive in the physical world. In return, he shared fascinating details about Riverside High School's history that weren't available in any conventional sources. Working with Dr. Blackwood became the most rewarding aspect of my custodial position. Our collaboration produced a comprehensive history of Riverside High School that documented the contributions of hundreds of students and faculty members whose achievements had been forgotten over the decades. Dr. Blackwood's research revealed patterns of excellence and dedication that showed how the school had maintained its academic reputation through changing times and circumstances. The phantom librarian was particularly interested in documenting the stories of students who had overcome significant challenges to achieve success, faculty members who had made personal sacrifices to improve educational opportunities, and community supporters who had contributed to the school's development during difficult periods. His work celebrated the human elements of institutional history that often get overlooked in official records. During my final 2 years at Riverside, Dr. Blackwood and I developed a routine that allowed him to complete his historical research while enabling me to assist with practical aspects of documentation and preservation. I would transcribe his notes into typed format, organize his research materials for easier access, and occasionally conduct interviews with elderly community members who had known people. Dr. Blackwood was researching. Completed history that emerged from our collaboration was remarkable. In its scope and detail, Dr. Blackwood had documented not just the major events and achievements in Riverside High School's development, but also the personal stories that showed how individual dedication and commitment had shaped the institution's character over nearly a century of operation. When I retired from my position at Riverside High School, I left the completed research with Mrs. Blackwood, who happened to be Dr. Blackwood's daughter-in-law, and had married into the family knowing about her husband's father's uncompleted project. She was amazed by the thoroughness and quality of the work, and arranged for the school district to publish it as an official history in time for Riverside High School's 75th anniversary celebration. My replacement reported no unusual library activity, suggesting that Dr. Blackwood had finally completed his life's work and found the peace that had eluded him for over 60 years. But the legacy of his research continues to inspire students and faculty who understand that academic excellence is built through generations of individual effort and dedication to learning. Experience taught me that some commitments transcend mortality, and that places dedicated to education and knowledge can preserve the intellectual passion of those who serve them during life. Dr. Blackwood's phantom research demonstrated that libraries are more than repositories of information. They're living institutions where the pursuit of understanding continues, regardless of the physical limitations that normally constrain human existence. Story 4. The Maintenance Guardian. I'm Robert Chun, and for 9 years I worked as the night maintenance supervisor at Lincoln High School in eastern Michigan. The position involved maintaining all mechanical systems, heating equipment, and electrical infrastructure for a school that served over 2,000 students and 150 staff members. It was complex work that required both technical skill and intimate knowledge of a building whose systems had been installed and modified over 7 decades of operation. Lincoln High School was built in 1947, but had undergone multiple expansions and renovations that created a complicated maze of mechanical systems running through basements, crawl spaces, and utility tunnels throughout the building. The main boiler room was located in the original basement, housing equipment from several different eras that had been integrated into a single heating system serving the entire campus. Managing this system required constant attention and regular maintenance that could only be performed during evening hours when the building was unoccupied. The boiler room itself was a cathedral of industrial equipment, with massive heating units, water tanks, and electrical panels arranged in rows that stretched the full length of the basement. Overhead, a complex network of pipes, ducts, and conduits carried steam, water, electricity, and data throughout the building. The environment was hot, noisy, and demanding, requiring specialized knowledge to operate safely and efficiently. During my second year at Lincoln, I began discovering maintenance records and technical documents that shouldn't have existed in the boiler room. These weren't official records from the school district or equipment manufacturers, but handwritten logs detailing repairs, modifications, and improvements that had been made to the building systems over decades. The handwriting was consistent throughout, suggesting they had been maintained by a single person over an impossibly long period of time. The phantom maintenance records were extraordinarily detailed and technically accurate. They documented every major repair, system upgrade, and preventive maintenance activity that had occurred in the building since its original construction. More importantly, they contained technical insights and problem-solving approaches that were far more sophisticated than would be expected from typical custodial staff. Someone with extensive engineering knowledge had been documenting and improving the building's mechanical systems. For over 50 years, the records also contained maintenance schedules and repair procedures that weren't available in any official documentation. They showed me how to access utility areas that weren't on any building plans, explained relationships between different systems that weren't obvious from normal operation, and provided troubleshooting guides for problems that the original equipment manufacturers had never anticipated. Following these phantom instructions allowed me to maintain the building systems far more effectively than would have been possible using only official documentation. More disturbing was the realization that the phantom maintenance records were being updated in real time. Each morning, I would find new entries documenting any work I had performed the previous evening, along with recommendations for future improvements and warnings about potential problems I should monitor. The quality of these observations suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the building's condition and extensive experience with institutional maintenance work. The breakthrough came during my 4th year at Lincoln, when I decided to stay in the boiler room overnight to observe who or what was creating these mysterious maintenance records. I positioned myself at a workbench where I could see the entire mechanical area while appearing to be occupied with routine paperwork and equipment checks. Around 3 a.m., I began to see movement in the utility areas between the major equipment installations. Someone was moving through the boiler room with obvious familiarity, checking gauges, adjusting valves, and performing maintenance activities with professional competence. The figure was indistinct in the industrial lighting, but appeared to be an older man, wearing work clothes that seemed appropriate for mechanical work but oddly dated in style. The phantom maintenance worker was extraordinarily thorough in his approach to building systems care. He checked every piece of equipment in sequence, noted readings on gauges and meters, and made minor adjustments that optimized performance without requiring major repairs. His movements suggested decades of experience with these specific systems, and he worked with an efficiency that could only come from intimate knowledge of every component's operational characteristics. As I continued to observe, I realized that the phantom worker was performing maintenance tasks that went far beyond what was officially required or even recognized as necessary. He was making subtle improvements to system efficiency, preventing problems before they developed into failures, and maintaining the building's mechanical infrastructure at a level of excellence that exceeded normal institutional standards. The phantom worker was also documenting his activities in the handwritten maintenance logs, updating records that provided a comprehensive history of every system in the building. His documentation was so detailed and accurate that it served as a master reference for understanding how the building's mechanical systems had evolved over decades of operation and modification. Through careful examination of the phantom maintenance records, I learned that the mysterious worker was likely Thomas Morrison, who had served as Lincoln High School's head custodian from 1947 until his death in 1984. Morrison had been legendary among staff for his mechanical knowledge and his ability to keep the building's aging systems running efficiently. Despite limited budgets and resources, his maintenance records from life matched the handwriting I observed in the phantom documentation, and his technical expertise aligned perfectly with the sophisticated work being performed by the spirit. Morrison's phantom maintenance work was preserving and improving building systems in ways that would have been impossible for normal custodial staff. He had knowledge of modifications and repairs that had been made over decades, understood relationships between systems that weren't documented anywhere else, and could anticipate problems that wouldn't become apparent to living maintenance workers until major failures occurred. Situation became collaborative when I realized that Morrison was aware of my presence and was actually trying to train me in advanced maintenance techniques. During my 5th year at Lincoln, he began leaving detailed instructions for specific procedures, showing me how to perform maintenance tasks that weren't covered in any official training programs, and sharing insights about building operations that could only come from someone who had devoted his entire career to institutional maintenance work. Working with Morrison's Phantom guidance allowed me to maintain Lincoln High School's mechanical systems at a level of performance that exceeded anything in the building's modern history. Equipment that should have required frequent repairs ran smoothly for years, energy efficiency improved dramatically, and the overall comfort and reliability of the building environment reached standards that impressed district administrators and building users alike. Morrison was particularly focused on teaching me how to integrate new technology with legacy systems, ensuring that necessary upgrades didn't compromise the efficiency and reliability that had been achieved through decades of careful maintenance work. His Phantom instruction covered everything from basic mechanical principles to advanced troubleshooting techniques that weren't available in any textbooks or training programs. The Phantom maintenance supervisor was also documenting building systems in ways that would benefit future maintenance workers. His records included not just routine maintenance information, but also historical context about why specific modifications had been made, how different systems interacted during various operating conditions, and what approaches had proven most effective for long-term equipment preservation. During my final 2 years at Lincoln, Morrison and I developed a routine that combined his decades of experience with my technical training and modern equipment knowledge. The collaboration produced maintenance standards that preserved the building's mechanical systems while incorporating improvements that enhanced efficiency and reliability. Morrison's Phantom expertise ensured that necessary upgrades respected the engineering principles that had made the original system so successful. Comprehensive maintenance documentation that emerged from our collaboration was extraordinary in its detail and practical value. Morrison had documented not just what had been done to maintain building systems, but why specific approaches had been chosen, how problems had been solved, and what lessons had been learned from decades of institutional maintenance work. When I accepted a promotion to district facilities manager, I left the completed maintenance documentation with my replacement, along with detailed instructions for continuing the collaborative relationship with Morrison's spirit. The new maintenance supervisor reported that the Phantom guidance continued, suggesting that Morrison's commitment to building care transcended his physical existence and would benefit Lincoln High School for as long as his expertise was needed. My experience at Lincoln High School demonstrated that some professional commitments extend beyond mortality, particularly when they involve preserving institutions that serve communities over multiple generations. Morrison's Phantom maintenance work showed that buildings are more than just structures. They're complex systems that require dedicated care from people who understand that their work affects hundreds of users every day. The legacy of Morrison's Phantom maintenance continues to influence how I approach institutional facility management. His example showed me that excellence in building operations comes from understanding systems as integrated wholes rather than collections of individual components, and that the best maintenance work prevents problems rather than simply reacting to failures after they occur. Story 5. The Evening Watchman. My name is David Reeves, and for 10 years I worked as the evening custodian at Fairmont Middle School in southern Texas. The position required me to clean and secure the entire facility after evening activities ended. But the cafeteria kitchen was always the most demanding and unsettling part of my nightly routine. Commercial kitchen equipment requires specialized cleaning procedures, and the health department standards for school food service meant that any mistakes in sanitation could result in serious consequences. For hundreds of students, Fairmont Middle School served approximately 800 students daily. requiring a kitchen operation that prepared and served over 1,000 meals each day. The kitchen was a massive facility with industrial-grade equipment, including multiple ovens, grills, fryers, and refrigeration. Units that had been installed during various renovations since the school's construction in 1965. The complexity of the operation meant that evening cleaning took nearly 3 hours to complete properly. The kitchen cleaning routine was strictly regulated by district policy and health department requirements. Every surface had to be sanitized. All equipment had to be properly cleaned and prepared for the next day's service. And the walk-in cooler and freezer units required daily temperature monitoring and cleaning, schedules that couldn't be compromised. The work was physically demanding and had to be performed in exact sequence to ensure compliance with food safety regulations. During my 3rd year at Fairmont, I began noticing that the kitchen appeared to be used during evening hours when the building should have been completely secured. Equipment would be found in different positions from how I had left it the previous night, with signs of recent use that couldn't be explained by normal cafeteria operations. More disturbing, I would occasionally discover food preparation that had been completed during overnight hours. Despite the fact that all kitchen staff left the building by 4 p.m. each day, the phantom food preparation was sophisticated and professional, far beyond what would be expected from unauthorized building access by vandals or pranksters. Someone was using the kitchen to prepare elaborate meals using proper techniques and commercial equipment, but they were doing so after hours when the building was supposed to be completely empty. The quality of the work suggested extensive experience with institutional food service rather than casual cooking knowledge. The prepared food would be found arranged on serving trays in the walk-in cooler, properly covered and labeled with preparation dates and content descriptions. The meals were always complete and balanced, featuring combinations of proteins, vegetables, and starches that met district nutrition requirements. More puzzling, the portions were sized for children rather than adults, and the presentation suggested they were intended for school lunch service, despite being prepared outside of normal operating hours. I reported these incidents to the day administration, but they found no evidence of unauthorized building access or misuse of kitchen equipment. All doors and windows were properly secured each morning. The alarm system showed no breaches, and none of the cafeteria staff had been using the kitchen for after-hours food preparation. The mystery deepened when I began staying later in the kitchen to observe what was happening during the night hours. The breakthrough came during my 5th year at Fairmont, when I decided to position myself quietly in the kitchen storage area to see if I could detect the source of the mysterious food preparation activities. I dimmed the lights and sat behind the dry goods storage shelves, pretending to inventory supplies while actually watching for any unusual activity in the main cooking area. Around midnight, I began to notice movement near the main preparation stations. Someone was working in the kitchen with obvious familiarity with the equipment and procedures, moving efficiently between different cooking stations and preparing what appeared to be lunch meals for the following day. The figure was indistinct in the low light, but appeared to be a middle-aged woman wearing a hairnet and apron that suggested professional food service experience. The phantom cook worked with impressive skill and organization, following proper food safety procedures and using industrial equipment with the competence that could only come from years of institutional kitchen experience. She prepared multiple menu items simultaneously, coordinating timing and temperature requirements to ensure that all components would be ready at the same time. Her work demonstrated the kind of expertise that made school food service operations successful. As I watched, more details became clear. The phantom cook was translucent, visible but obviously not solid in the way living people appeared. Her movements had a quality that suggested she existed in a slightly different dimension from the physical world, interacting with the kitchen equipment and ingredients, but not quite inhabiting the same space as normal reality. She was continuing food service work that had been her life's passion and professional identity. The Phantom Cook worked until approximately 4 a.m., completing meal preparation that would have taken the normal cafeteria staff several hours during regular operations. She properly stored all prepared food in refrigeration units, cleaned and sanitized all equipment according to health department standards, and left the kitchen in perfect condition for the next day's service. But her prepared meals existed in a dimension that didn't quite align with normal reality. My observations over the following months revealed that the Phantom Cook followed a consistent schedule, appearing in the kitchen 5 nights per week to prepare meals that exceeded normal cafeteria offerings in both quality and nutritional value. Her work was motivated by a dedication to student welfare that had persisted beyond her physical existence, continuing to serve children who needed proper nutrition to succeed in their educational activities through careful examination of her work patterns and cooking techniques. I learned that the Phantom was likely Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, who had served as Fairmont Middle School's head cook from 1972 until her death in 1994. Mrs. Rodriguez had been legendary among students and staff for her dedication to providing nutritious and appealing meals despite tight budgets and institutional constraints. Her cooking methods matched the techniques I observed being used by the Phantom Cook, and her commitment to student welfare aligned perfectly with the motivation behind the after-hours meal preparation. Mrs. Rodriguez's Phantom cooking was extraordinarily beneficial for students who needed additional nutrition support. Her prepared meals were designed to provide maximum nutritional value while appealing to middle school students who often struggled with healthy eating habits. The meals she prepared addressed specific dietary needs and included options for students with food allergies or cultural dietary restrictions that weren't always accommodated by standard cafeteria menus. The situation became collaborative when I realized that Mrs. Rodriguez was aware of my presence and was actually trying to expand the school's food service capabilities. During my 6th year at Fairmont, she began leaving detailed recipes and meal planning suggestions, showing me how to prepare nutritious meals using available equipment and ingredients, and sharing insights about student nutrition that could only come from someone who had devoted her career to institutional food service. Working with Mrs. Rodriguez's Phantom guidance allowed me to assist the day cafeteria staff in improving meal quality and expanding menu options that better served student nutritional needs. Her recipes provided alternatives for students with special dietary requirements. Her meal planning techniques improved efficiency and reduced waste, and her overall approach to institutional cooking elevated the cafeteria program's reputation throughout the district. Mrs. Rodriguez was particularly focused on ensuring that economically disadvantaged students received adequate nutrition through school meal programs. Her Phantom cooking supplemented official food service with additional options that provided proper nutrition for students who might not have access to adequate meals at home. Her work demonstrated the kind of personal commitment that made school food service programs truly effective in supporting student welfare. The Phantom Cook was also documenting meal preparation techniques and nutritional information that would benefit future cafeteria staff. Her records included not just recipes and procedures, but also explanations of how to adapt institutional cooking methods to provide better nutrition while working within budget constraints and health department regulations. During my final 3 years at Fairmont, Mrs. Rodriguez and I developed a routine that combined her decades of experience with modern nutrition knowledge and updated equipment capabilities. The collaboration produced meal planning and preparation techniques that enhanced the school's food service program while maintaining the efficiency and cost-effectiveness required for institutional operations. The comprehensive nutrition and meal preparation documentation that emerged from our collaboration was remarkable. In its practical value for institutional food service, Mrs. Rodriguez had documented not just how to prepare nutritious meals for large groups, but why specific approaches were most effective for middle school students, how to accommodate diverse dietary needs, and what strategies worked best for encouraging healthy eating habits among young people. When I retired from my position at Fairmont Middle School, I left the completed meal planning documentation with the head cook, along with detailed explanations of Mrs. Rodriguez's phantom guidance and continuing commitment to student nutrition. The cafeteria staff reported that the phantom assistance continued, suggesting that Mrs. Rodriguez's dedication to feeding children transcended her physical existence and would benefit Fairmont students for as long as her expertise was needed. My experience at Fairmont Middle School demonstrated that some professional commitments extend beyond mortality, particularly when they involve caring for children who depend on institutional services for basic needs. Mrs. Rodriguez's phantom cooking showed that schools are more than just educational facilities. They're communities where dedicated staff members continue to serve students regardless of the physical limitations that normally constrain human existence. The legacy of Mrs. Rodriguez's phantom food service continues to influence how I understand the importance of institutional support for student welfare. Her example showed me that excellence in school operations comes from recognizing that academic success depends on addressing students' basic needs for proper nutrition, and that the best food service programs are motivated by genuine concern for student health and development, rather than simply meeting minimum regulatory requirements.